What happens when your dream of growing fresh, sustainable food turns into a battle against bureaucracy? For Sarah, it all started with a single tomato plant, and ended with a war that rocked her entire neighborhood. Sarah Thompson had always loved gardening. As a child, she'd helped her grandmother tend to rows of vibrant vegetables in their backyard, learning the joy of nurturing life from seed to harvest. So when she moved into her new home in Willow Creek, a suburban community known for its manicured lawns and strict HOA rules, she brought that passion with her. At first, Sarah followed the HOA guidelines meticulously. Her front yard was a pristine sea of green grass, trimmed to perfection, just like her neighbors. But something about it felt empty. She longed for color, for life, for purpose. Then one day, while scrolling through social media, she stumbled across a post about urban gardening. It featured photos of lush front yard vegetable gardens bursting with tomatoes, peppers, and herbs. The caption read, "Turn your lawn into a sustainable oasis." Inspired, Sarah decided to take action. She started small, planting a few tomato plants along the edges of her flower beds. To her delight, they thrived under her care, producing juicy red fruits within weeks. Encouraged by their success, she expanded her efforts, replacing patches of grass with raised beds filled with kale, carrots, and zucchini. By the end of summer, her front yard had transformed into a mini-farm, a riot of green leaves, colorful blooms, and ripe produce. But not everyone shared her enthusiasm. One crisp September morning, as Sarah watered her plants, a black sedan pulled up to the curb outside her house. Out stepped Mr. Harold Jenkins, the president of the Willow Creek Homeowners Association, a man infamous for his rigid adherence to the community's aesthetic standards. Clutching a clipboard, he marched toward Sarah with an air of authority. "Good morning, Mrs. Thompson," he said curtly, adjusting his glasses. "I'm afraid I need to inform you that your landscaping violates Article 12, Section 3 of the HOA Guidelines. Specifically, the clause regarding approved vegetation. All visible areas must consist of uniform turf or approved ornamental plants." Sarah blinked, momentarily stunned. "Are you serious? These are vegetables, they're healthy, sustainable, and good for the environment." Mr. Jenkins sighed, flipping through the pages of his clipboard. "Be that as it may, the rules exist to maintain property values and ensure visual consistency throughout the neighborhood. If these modifications aren't removed within 30 days, we'll have no choice but to issue fines." Sarah's heart sank. She glanced at her thriving garden, the result of months of hard work and care, and felt a surge of frustration. How could anyone see this as a problem? Wasn't sustainability more important than arbitrary rules? "I'm sorry, but I can't do that," she replied firmly. "This garden means a lot to me, not just because it's beautiful, but because it helps feed my family and reduces our carbon footprint. Surely, there's some way we can compromise." Mr. Jenkins shook his head. "Rules are rules, Mrs. Thompson. I suggest you reconsider before things escalate further." As he walked back to his car, Sarah clenched her fists, anger bubbling beneath the surface. She understood the importance of maintaining a cohesive look in the neighborhood, but this felt absurd. Why should she sacrifice her values for the sake of conformity? That evening, as she sat on her porch watching the sunset, Sarah made a decision. She wasn't going to back down, not without a fight. This wasn't just about her garden anymore, it was about standing up for what mattered. And if the HOA wanted a war, they were going to get one. Sarah spent the next few days oscillating between anger and determination. On one hand, she couldn't believe the HOA was willing to penalize her for something as harmless as growing vegetables. On the other hand, she knew that standing up to authority figures like Mr. Jenkins wouldn't be easy, not in a community as tightly controlled as Willow Creek. But Sarah wasn't the type to give up without a fight. She decided to educate herself about the HOA's guidelines and local housing laws. After hours of research, she discovered a loophole. While the HOA could regulate aesthetics, they couldn't outright ban sustainable practices like urban gardening if they contributed to environmental conservation. Armed with this knowledge, Sarah drafted a polite but firm letter to the board, requesting an exception based on her garden's ecological benefits. "I understand the importance of maintaining neighborhood standards," she wrote. "However, my front yard garden promotes sustainability, reduces water usage, and provides fresh produce for my family. It aligns with broader efforts to combat climate change and create greener communities." She sent the letter off, hoping for a positive response. But deep down, she knew it was unlikely. The HOA prided itself on uniformity, and exceptions, even well-reasoned ones, were rarely granted. As the days passed, Sarah noticed subtle changes in her interactions with neighbors. Some avoided eye contact when passing her house, clearly uncomfortable with the brewing conflict. Others, however, stopped by to express quiet support. One afternoon, a young mother named Lisa approached Sarah while she was harvesting tomatoes. "I think what you're doing is amazing," Lisa said softly, glancing over her shoulder to ensure no one was listening. "I've always wanted to grow my own food, but I was too scared of breaking the rules. You're inspiring me to try." Sarah smiled, touched by the comment. For the first time since the confrontation with Mr. Jenkins, she felt a flicker of hope. Maybe she wasn't alone in this fight. Encouraged by Lisa's words, Sarah decided to take her campaign to the next level. She reached out to local food bloggers and environmental activists, inviting them to visit her garden and share its story online. Within days, photos of her lush front yard began appearing on social media platforms, accompanied by captions praising her creativity and resilience. "This is what true sustainability looks like," one blogger wrote beneath a photo of Sarah holding a basket of freshly picked vegetables. "Why punish someone for trying to make the world a better place?" The post quickly gained traction, sparking conversations about the absurdity of HOA restrictions and the importance of supporting eco-friendly initiatives. Neighbors who had previously remained silent started chiming in, sharing their own frustrations with the HOA's rigid rules. "Why can't we have gardens like this?" one resident commented. "It's beautiful and practical." Another added, "If Sarah gets fined, I'll start planting vegetables in my yard too. Enough is enough." Meanwhile, Mr. Jenkins grew increasingly agitated. He called an emergency meeting of the HOA board, accusing Sarah of deliberately trying to undermine their authority. "We cannot allow this kind of behavior to continue," he declared. "If we let her get away with it, everyone will start thinking they can do whatever they want." The board agreed to send Sarah a formal warning, reminding her of the impending fine if she didn't comply. But instead of intimidating her, the letter only strengthened her resolve. Sarah realized that the HOA's resistance was rooted in fear, a fear of losing control. And she was determined to prove that change was possible. That weekend, Sarah hosted a small gathering in her front yard, inviting neighbors to tour her garden and learn about urban farming. She handed out seed packets and offered tips on starting small-scale vegetable plots. By the end of the day, several residents had pledged to join her cause, vowing to challenge the HOA's outdated policies. As Sarah stood among her supporters, watching children snack on cherry tomatoes straight from the vine, she felt a renewed sense of purpose. This wasn't just about her garden anymore, it was about creating a movement. A movement that celebrated individuality, sustainability, and the power of community. But she also knew the road ahead would be difficult. The HOA wasn't going to back down easily, and the battle was far from over. Still, Sarah refused to let fear dictate her choices. If anything, the growing support only fueled her determination to see this through. Sarah's front yard garden wasn't just about growing vegetables, it was about challenging an entire system of conformity. But as her fight gained traction, she realized that standing up for sustainability would require more than just passion, it would require strategy. The gathering in Sarah's front yard had been a turning point. For the first time, neighbors who had previously stayed silent began speaking out against the HOA's restrictive rules. Inspired by Sarah's courage, they started planting their own vegetable patches, transforming once bland lawns into vibrant gardens. Within weeks, Willow Creek looked less like a cookie-cutter neighborhood and more like a community embracing change. But Mr. Jenkins wasn't ready to concede. He saw the growing movement as a direct threat to his authority, and he wasn't going down without a fight. Determined to squash the rebellion, he called another emergency HOA meeting, this time with a plan to escalate the situation. He proposed fining not only Sarah but also any homeowner caught growing vegetables in their front yards. His argument? Uniformity was non-negotiable, and allowing exceptions would set a dangerous precedent. The proposal sparked outrage among residents. During the meeting, several homeowners stood up to challenge Mr. Jenkins, citing environmental benefits and personal freedoms. One resident, a retired lawyer named Tom, pointed out that the HOA's actions might violate state laws protecting sustainable practices. Another neighbor shared a story about how her family had saved thousands of dollars on groceries thanks to their backyard garden, a clear example of how these initiatives benefited everyone. Despite the backlash, Mr. Jenkins refused to budge. He argued that the HOA's primary responsibility was maintaining property values, not promoting individual hobbies. "If we allow one person to break the rules," he warned, "we'll have chaos." But Sarah wasn't backing down either. She knew that winning this battle required more than just local support, it needed national attention. So, she reached out to a prominent environmental activist named Emily Green, whose YouTube channel had millions of subscribers. Emily was immediately intrigued by Sarah's story and agreed to visit Willow Creek to document the conflict. When Emily arrived, she spent hours filming Sarah's garden, interviewing neighbors, and even staging a mock confrontation with Mr. Jenkins. The resulting video, titled "How One Woman Fought Back Against an Overbearing HOA," went viral almost instantly. It showcased Sarah's journey from a quiet gardener to a symbol of resistance, highlighting the absurdity of the HOA's rules and the broader implications of their actions. Within days, the video had garnered millions of views, sparking conversations across social media platforms. Hashtags like #FrontYardRevolution and #HOAFreedom trended globally, drawing attention from news outlets, influencers, and even politicians. Suddenly, Sarah's struggle wasn't just about her garden, it was part of a larger debate about homeowners' rights, sustainability, and the role of HOAs in modern communities. Meanwhile, the HOA found itself under unprecedented scrutiny. Local reporters flooded Willow Creek, eager to cover the story. Neighbors who had initially remained neutral now came forward to share their own experiences with unreasonable HOA rules. One woman recounted how she'd been fined for hanging laundry on a clothesline instead of using a dryer. Another described being forced to remove a bird feeder because it violated aesthetic guidelines. As the pressure mounted, the HOA board began to fracture. Some members, realizing the tide was turning against them, started questioning whether their rigid policies were worth the backlash. Others, including Mr. Jenkins, dug in deeper, clinging to their belief in absolute control. Sarah, meanwhile, continued building alliances. She partnered with local advocacy groups specializing in property rights and sustainability, drafting petitions calling for reforms to HOA regulations. Within weeks, thousands of signatures poured in, drawing support from homeowners across the country who had faced similar battles. But the most powerful moment came when Emily Green returned to Willow Creek for a follow-up video. This time, she invited Mr. Jenkins to participate in a public debate, pitting him against Sarah and other residents who supported urban gardening. The showdown took place at the community center, filling every seat and spilling into overflow rooms. Cameras from local news stations lined the walls, capturing every word exchanged between the two sides. Mr. Jenkins tried to defend the HOA's stance, citing concerns about property values and uniformity. But Sarah countered each argument with evidence, photos of thriving gardens, testimonials from families saving money on groceries, and even studies showing how green spaces improved mental health and reduced carbon footprints. When asked about the concrete reasons behind their rules, Mr. Jenkins stumbled, unable to provide anything beyond vague notions of community standards. By the end of the debate, it was clear that the tide had turned. Even some of Mr. Jenkins's staunchest supporters began to question whether the HOA's approach was outdated. As the audience erupted in applause, Sarah felt a surge of pride, not just for herself but for everyone who had stood up alongside her. Still, she knew the fight wasn't over yet. The HOA hadn't officially backed down, and there were still fines looming over her head. But for the first time, Sarah felt hopeful. With national attention, growing support, and a strategic plan in place, she believed they could win this battle, and inspire others to do the same. The debate at the community center had been a watershed moment for Willow Creek. For years, residents had quietly resented the HOA's iron grip on their lives, but now they had a voice, and a leader in Sarah Thompson. Her calm demeanor, combined with undeniable evidence of the benefits of urban gardening, had inspired even the most hesitant neighbors to join the cause. But Mr. Jenkins wasn't ready to surrender just yet. In the days following the debate, he doubled down on his efforts to enforce the HOA's rules. Notices began appearing on doorsteps across the neighborhood, warning homeowners to remove any unapproved vegetation or face escalating fines. Some residents received letters threatening legal action if they didn't comply within 48 hours. Sarah saw these tactics for what they were, an act of desperation. The HOA was trying to intimidate people into submission, but she knew better than to let fear dictate her choices. Instead of backing down, she rallied her supporters, organizing a mass protest outside the HOA office. Dozens of residents showed up, holding signs that read "Gardens over Grass" and "Sustainability Uniformity." Food bloggers and environmental advocates joined the demonstration, amplifying their message through social media. Local news crews covered the event extensively, capturing footage of children handing out tomatoes grown in Sarah's garden while parents chanted slogans demanding reform. One reporter interviewed a young boy who proudly held up a zucchini twice the size of his arm. "This is from our front yard," he said, grinning. "And it tastes way better than anything from the store." The protest drew national attention, with major outlets picking up the story. Politicians weighed in, praising Sarah's courage and calling for statewide reviews of HOA policies. A state representative even announced plans to introduce legislation protecting homeowners' rights to grow food on their property. For the first time, it felt like real change was possible, not just for Willow Creek but for communities everywhere. Meanwhile, the HOA board descended into chaos. Several members resigned, citing personal reasons or moral objections to the crackdown. Others openly criticized Mr. Jenkins, accusing him of alienating residents and damaging the neighborhood's reputation. By the end of the week, the board was fractured, with no clear leadership or direction. But Mr. Jenkins still clung to power, determined to salvage his authority. He called another emergency meeting, this time inviting local officials and media to address the controversy. Dressed in his usual suit and tie, he stood before a packed room of reporters and residents, attempting to defend the HOA's stance. "We understand that emotions are running high," he began, his tone measured but strained. "However, the rules exist to maintain property values and ensure uniformity within our community. Allowing exceptions, even seemingly harmless ones, could set a dangerous precedent." His statement was met with boos and jeers from the crowd. One resident shouted, "Uniformity? Really? Over fresh food?" Another chimed in, "Why don't you tell us how much money you've spent suing neighbors instead of fixing potholes?" The chaos escalated until security guards had to escort several angry attendees out of the room. By the end of the meeting, it was clear that the HOA's reputation had taken a massive hit. Even longtime supporters were questioning whether the organization had gone too far. Back at home, Sarah watched the live stream of the meeting with a mix of satisfaction and relief. She had started this journey alone, but now she had an entire community standing behind her. Still, she knew the fight wasn't over. The HOA hadn't officially backed down, and there were still fines looming over her head. To keep the momentum going, Sarah launched a crowdfunding campaign to cover legal fees and support other families facing similar battles. Donations poured in from across the country, exceeding her goal within days. Local businesses offered discounts to participants in the front yard garden movement, while schools invited Sarah to speak to students about sustainability and civic engagement. As the weeks passed, the transformation of Willow Creek became undeniable. More and more lawns disappeared, replaced by lush vegetable gardens and colorful flower beds. Neighbors who had once avoided each other now exchanged tips on composting and crop rotation. The sense of camaraderie was palpable, turning the neighborhood into a true community. But Sarah remained focused on the bigger picture. With the help of advocacy groups and pro bono lawyers, she filed a formal complaint with the State Housing Authority, accusing the HOA of overreach and discrimination against eco-friendly practices. She also drafted a proposal for revised guidelines, emphasizing flexibility and sustainability over rigid conformity. By the time fall arrived, the HOA was forced to acknowledge the shifting tide. Under mounting pressure, they agreed to temporarily suspend enforcement of Article 12, Section 3, the clause banning front yard gardens. While they framed the decision as a gesture of goodwill, it was clear to everyone that the rebellion had won. For Sarah, the victory was bittersweet. On one hand, she was thrilled to see her garden thrive without fear of fines or threats. On the other hand, she missed the simplicity of those early days when growing vegetables had been just about feeding her family. Still, she understood the importance of what they had accomplished. "It's not just about me anymore," she told Lisa one evening as they sat together on Sarah's porch, watching fireflies dance in the twilight. "It's about proving that we can make a difference, if we stand together." Lisa nodded, smiling. "You've already made a difference. Look at how far we've come." In that moment, surrounded by laughter and the scent of blooming flowers, Sarah realized something profound. Change wasn't easy, it required patience, persistence, and courage. But when people came together for a common cause, anything was possible. Sometimes, the smallest acts of defiance can spark the biggest changes. For Willow Creek, Sarah's garden wasn't just a patch of vegetables, it was the seed of a revolution that would redefine their neighborhood forever. By winter, Willow Creek was unrecognizable from the cookie-cutter suburb it had once been. The monotony of manicured lawns had given way to a vibrant tapestry of colors, textures, and life. Front yard gardens flourished, each one unique yet connected by a shared spirit of creativity and sustainability. Neighbors exchanged produce over fences, sharing recipes and stories about their harvests. Children played among sunflowers taller than themselves, while bees buzzed happily between blossoms. It was as if the entire neighborhood had awakened, both literally and figuratively. For Sarah, the transformation was deeply personal. Her front yard garden, once a source of conflict, had become a symbol of hope and resilience. She no longer feared fines or threats. Instead, she felt pride every time someone stopped to admire her handiwork or ask for advice. What had started as a single tomato plant had grown into something far greater, a movement that celebrated individuality, sustainability, and community. The HOA, meanwhile, underwent its own metamorphosis. Faced with overwhelming public pressure and legal scrutiny, the board voted to dissolve itself, paving the way for a new governing body elected by residents. This time, candidates ran on platforms of transparency, inclusivity, and environmental stewardship. Sarah herself was approached to run, but she declined, preferring to focus on grassroots efforts rather than formal leadership roles. Still, she remained actively involved in shaping Willow Creek's future, working closely with the new board to draft guidelines that prioritized flexibility and collaboration over rigidity and control. One of the most significant changes came in the form of statewide legislation inspired by Sarah's fight. The proposed bill, championed by the state representative who had supported her cause, sought to protect homeowners' rights to grow food on their property, regardless of HOA rules. Dubbed the Front Yard Freedom Act, it passed unanimously, setting a precedent for communities across the country. Local news outlets hailed Sarah as a hero, and invitations poured in for her to speak at conferences, schools, and advocacy events. But despite the accolades, Sarah stayed grounded. She knew that real change wasn't about fame or recognition, it was about empowering others to make a difference in their own lives. To that end, she launched a nonprofit organization called Roots and Resilience, dedicated to promoting urban gardening and challenging restrictive housing policies. Through workshops, online resources, and community outreach programs, the initiative helped countless families transform their yards into thriving ecosystems. As spring returned to Willow Creek, Sarah hosted a neighborhood celebration to mark the one-year anniversary of her rebellion. Tables were set up along the street, laden with dishes made from homegrown ingredients: zucchini bread, kale salads, roasted carrots, and jars of homemade salsa. Musicians performed on porches, while children ran through sprinklers and painted murals on sidewalks. At the center of it all stood Sarah, raising a glass of freshly squeezed lemonade in a toast. "To Willow Creek," she said, her voice warm but steady. "May we always remember that beauty isn't about uniformity, it's about diversity. And may we never forget what happens when we stand together." The crowd erupted in cheers, clinking glasses and applauding. For the first time in years, the neighborhood felt alive, not with tension or conformity, but with genuine connection. Sarah glanced around at the smiling faces, feeling a deep sense of gratitude. She had started this fight alone, but she hadn't finished it that way. Together, they had turned a personal battle into a movement for change. That evening, as Sarah sat on her porch watching the sunset, she reflected on everything that had happened. Yes, the road had been long and difficult, but it had also been worth it. Willow Creek may never be perfect, but thanks to her courage and the community's unity, it was on the path to becoming a better, fairer place for everyone. And in that moment, surrounded by friends, family, and neighbors, Sarah knew she'd made the right choice. This wasn't just her victory, it belonged to all of them.